Worse, state lawmakers voted themselves a hefty pay raise, their first in 12 years. But now lawmakers are hearing quite a bit about the Beacon Hill pay hike. And as WBZ's Ted Wayman found out, the outrage that started as a murmur has turned into a roar.
It's totally unethical, immoral, not to mention unpopular. 55% pay raise in record speed.
It didn't take long for talk radio to heat up Boston airwaves. At WRKO, phone lines were lit up and most callers were fired up about the pay raise.
These people, for the majority, not all of them, are nothing but fakes, phonies, and frauds. What they have done for the past probably 50 years, and we've let them do, is nothing but steal our money, take away our constitutional rights, and laugh about it.
I agree with the previous caller. The people don't deserve, yes, they deserve raises, but not at the amount they voted themselves.
Whether they deserve it or not, state lawmakers voted themselves a $16,000 a year raise. It's a 55% pay hike, and many lawmakers aren't apologizing.
We can't worry about perception. We have to do what we think is right and suffer the consequences.
I've seen public outcry, but I've never seen anything equal to this.
Barbara Anderson and others against the pay raise are already strategizing how to turn it back. If nothing else, Anderson says the pressure is on the State House to earn it.
Every time they mess up on a bill, every time they don't address a serious issue like crime or welfare reform, it will give us a chance to remind everybody that I thought they were better people. Now we're paying them what they're allegedly worth.
I think that the cynicism, I mean, they've just thrown more fuel on the fire. There was an opportunity where people could make a choice, make a decision on who they wanted to elect, but they kept this secret until right after the election.
The legislative pay raise may have been passed in a matter of hours, but because of a provision in state law, voters won't get a chance to repeal it until 1996. At the State House in Boston, I'm Ted Wayman, WBZ News 4.
Governor Weld is expected to sign the pay raise into law next week. And up next...
This is Talk of New England. With Jim Braude on New England Cable News.
Welcome to Talk of New England. I'm your host, Jim Braude. I'm going to put two words next to each other and ask you to try to remember when you last used them both in the same sentence. Ready? Political leader. An oxymoron? Surely it was this week. In Washington, succumbing to the politics of fear and capitulation, Bill Clinton fired his Surgeon General, a frequent target of Republican criticism. Her independent, honest thoughts were tolerated until Newt took over. Now she's gone. We'll talk about the Jocelyn Elder situation and what it signals for the next 2 years in our Reporters' Corner later in the show with novelist Carol Rivers and Globe columnist Alan Lupo. And then there's Beacon Hill. As we speak, Senate President Bolger and Governor Weld are jetting off to Ireland to join their co-conspirator, Charlie Flaherty, on a trade mission to Ireland. There he is, as a matter of fact. Don't you think he'd rather be somewhere else than in that particular picture? In case you missed it, here's the deal. On November 30th, Weld filed a bill to raise legislators' salaries by $16,000. 2 days later, there's a hearing, and in the space of 54 minutes, the bill is on its way to Weld's desk. While the matter awaits his signature, we learned that legislative leaders made the measure repeal-proof. And while they were doing that admirable deed, a multi-million-dollar tax break beloved by Weld flies through both houses in, you ready for this one, 15 minutes, with virtually no member except Flaherty, Bolger, and one Republican knowing what was going on. The next day, Weld signs the pay raise, and 24 hours later, the price tag for Weld's support, the tax break, becomes law. To hell with democracy and ethics. Weld won 71% of the vote. He knows what's best for the great unwashed masses, doesn't he? But does he know what's good for him? Other questions remain. Will outraged, duped legislators attempt to undo the capital gains scam? Will grassroots activists follow through in their threat to repeal the pay raise, despite the Troika's effort to prevent it? Will this be the straw which finally breaks Bolger and Flaherty's backs? We'll try to answer all of these questions and more with our guests today. And they are Barbara Anderson of Citizens for Limited Taxation. After 7 years of doing battle, Barbara and I finally agree on something. It's scary, isn't it? I think so, too. And Diane Wilkerson, recently elected to a second term in the State Senate from Boston. Welcome to both of you. Thanks for being here. Diane, if I can start with you. You voted for the pay raise.
I did.
When you voted for it, did you know that the House leaders had attached a provision that made it repeal-proof, at least through one kind of effort on the ballot?
Absolutely not. And in fact, there is at least some facts to indicate that it didn't happen until after the vote was taken.
Even after you people had voted in the Senate? We'll get back to that. Number two, when you voted, or if you voted, on the provision entitled, this was the name of this bill, an act to provide tax relief for low-income families. This is the piece that had the capital gains thing glommed in. Did you know that the capital gains piece was part of it?
I mean, I can tell you that as I sit here, I don't ever remember hearing it come up. I'm not sure that I was in the chamber. There's no way to check. There was no roll call. There was no voice vote. We've been doing something for at least the last 2 weeks, more than I can ever recall, and that is in session and then adjourning at the call of the chair, which means we're going to take a break and you figure out when we come back.
So let me be clear about
So I'm not even sure
let me be clear. So
when it happened.
You're not only not saying that you didn't know that capital gains was attached to this thing, you're not even sure if you were in the chamber when they gavelled this thing through with no roll call, no debate, no
Well,
nothing.
I can tell you this. There was never any mention in the chamber in this past week of the term capital gains. Never. Never.
Front page of the Boston Herald, I never quote the Boston Herald, says, let's make a deal. Is there any question in your mind that this was a deal between legislative leaders and Flaherty? Flaherty gives them their $16,000 and you your $16,000, but I mean through the legislative leaders, in return for which he gets this capital gains tax break he's been wanting for years?
I think that it would be very difficult not to reach that conclusion.
Fair enough. Barbara, how many years have you been on Beacon Hill?
Too many.
How many is that? 19? First grad tax
15.
in 1970, your first grad tax for you in 1976?
Well, I wasn't involved then. I came on about 1978. But
if you had to rank atrocities in your 15 years, would this make the top 5?
Oh, easily.
It would.
I've never seen anything like this. However, it's important to notice what Tom Finneran said.
Tom Finneran, the House Ways and Means Chair.
Ways and Means Chairman, he said this is no more outrageous or disingenuous or something than anything else we do around here. So it is actually the way it's done all the time. It's just it's such a visible, easy to understand issue that people are now watching it being done. But this is not, the context of this is not unusual. The totality of it is just a little bit intense. But
Barbara, just you have, obviously everybody knows this, I'm sure, been an ally of Weld's. Weld's been an ally of Citizens for Limited Taxation on most issues. This week, your characterization of this deal, for lack of a better expression, was to call it a bribe, basically saying that, well, why don't you just put it in your own words? What did you mean by a bribe?
Well, it's just that first they get their $16,000, and essentially I guess the way you have to picture it is the leadership was handed $3.4 million to distribute among the membership. And in return for that, the leadership agreed to give Weld his capital gains tax cut. So I saw quickly that if I did that, if I could raise $3 million, if I and my business allies could raise $3 million and hand Bulger and Flaherty the $3 million and say, here, distribute this equally to the membership, and in return for that I want a tax cut, it seems to me I would go to jail. And when I asked Governor Weld this on the Jerry Williams show, he agreed that if we did this, we'd get 20 years.
But his response was the reason we won't get 20 years is because this was legislation. But I think Diane, that Barbara makes a point. I mean, this is something where legislative leaders, if in fact there was a deal, took for their members something of personal benefit, in return for which legislative leaders arguably promised the governor that he was going to get his capital gains thing. I frankly don't care whether it's capital gains or an AFDC increase or something. It doesn't matter what it is, but for personal benefit, it appears that legislative leaders promised Weld a bill on his desk. Is it unfair to call it a bribe?
You are not going to get me to defend a system that I've been trying to change from the day I walked in there. I mean, I think Barbara's right. For me, this is another one of the kind of activities that I could add to the list. Unfortunately, I think until now we have been kind of crying in the wilderness. You know that there have been a very small group of us, vocal but a small group, saying, we do this all the time.
You're amongst the group of senators who supported Bill Keating's challenge to go both their Senate presidency.
The fact that a legislature would be made to feel uncomfortable and disloyal for asking the simple courtesy of being able to read anything that we're asked to vote on has been a point of major disagreement and contention. One that many of my colleagues never agreed and didn't support it. I am more curious about what's going to happen now.
Well, I think that's an interesting issue because the interesting thing here is I happen to support the concept of a pay raise. I don't support this pay raise done this way. Barbara, if I may speak for you on this, I think likes the capital gains piece.
Yes.
But it doesn't change the fact that the process is so abysmal that I think you find, and we're not aberrational at all, people saying this whole thing is such an assault on democracy that even the best parts of it aren't worth the price. So what does happen next? What happens Monday? I know there's an informal session in the legislature. What do people like Diane Wilkerson and your colleagues, whether you're for the capital gains or against it, whether you're for the pay raise or against it, what do you do to express the outrage that I assume you and a lot of your colleagues feel. What happens next?
Well, little, because unfortunately the people that we should be expressing it to, we won't be able to communicate unless we send them a telegram. They're off in Ireland, and they get to stay away until the heat dies down. And I hope it never does. My fear is that that people will be angry for a little while and it will go away. And the problem is that this is the way that business is done, that the public's money, and we have to remember that that's what we do. We are charged to distribute and redistribute the public's money, gets treated as if it was the personal income and pocket change for a very, very small number of people. And those who question it are ostracized. I would imagine there's going to be some price for me to pay for having said this on this show today. I anticipate that, but I decided a long time ago.
Well, you're already on the hit list.
That's right. I figured what's the worst that could happen?
Can I ask you a question? Because I'm just way back in the beginning of this conversation. You said that when you got the tax cut bill in the Senate, that it might not have had the capital gains tax in it at that time.
No.
We're talking about the pay raise piece. What Diane was saying. Well, go ahead, Diane. I'm sorry.
What I heard when the question came up about whether the pay raise was an appropriation bill and a repeal proof.
And if it's, by the way, just so you understand, if it's part of an appropriation bill, it's at least not subject to one kind of repeal effort. We'll get back to that in a couple of minutes. I'm sorry.
Like most, I found out about it watching the news. When I saw the chairman of Ways and Means say, I did it, I changed the language, I take full responsibility for it, and if anyone has a problem, it was my decision.
Yes, but did you not have the bill in front of you when you voted in the Senate, the pay raise bill?
No.
You didn't have so you voted on something you'd never seen?
What I'm saying to you is that it is an everyday, absolute, common occurrence. One of the first and initial rules reforms that were requested were that legislatures be given time to vote. We don't see a budget. The first big lesson for me was one of the most important bills for the entire year. Early in my term, in March of 1993, was education reform.
I remember you on television saying
absolutely.
You hadn't seen it.
For those, by the way, who
happened when you were in the ladies' room, I think you said.
I should just say, for those who feel that this is an aberrational moment, and Diane and Barbara are describing something that just happened this week, essentially what we're talking about, budgets that can be this thick, appear on the members of budget committees' desks, 5 minutes, 6 minutes
and they're asked
before
to come
a vote? Exactly, and the same
still
situation.
In the cellophane. The budget's still in the cellophane.
And frankly, I think because of the passion about the pay raise and the passion about this deal, this backroom deal, obviously it's in the public mind.
One of the stories from the FY95 budget was the Ways and Means Committee convened a meeting to pass on the budget. Senator Pines asked for a recess to allow the members to read it and was voted down by a majority of the members on the committee.
Democracy is a messy process. Barbara, Diane said a minute ago, leaders are in Ireland. That's one fact we all agree upon. There's not much one can do. These two things have been signed into law. Do you share that point of view? We'll get to your repeal effort.
Monday, and I hope people stay angry.
Well,
I've been angry.
Let's stay within the legislature. Do you get the sense that there's nothing the legislature do? What do you think the legislature should be doing next week to address either of these concerns?
I don't think there's anything the legislature can do next week, but there is certainly something they can do in January. They can get together and vote against the two leaders who did this to them. I finally realized sometime this week we were all angry because we weren't in the room with Baldwin, Weld, and Flaherty when they're making all these decisions. Then I suddenly realized, wait a minute, nobody's in that room. Our legislators aren't in that room. Our state reps are not in that room, and that means we aren't getting represented, and that means representative democracy doesn't exist anymore in Massachusetts.
But will it get
at least I'm not humiliated by this. Our state reps should be.
Every non-incumbent who ran on a ticket of voting against Bolger lost, the Keating's allies who are not already senators. Is this going to cause some of your colleagues who I hope were humiliated by this experience to say it's time to retire this guy?
That's the question. I keep wondering, when is enough going to be enough? What will be the thing that really breaks the camel's back?
The answer is no, not in the Senate. In the House you'd have a chance for a revolution. The House has had revolutions in the past. The Senate, the people not on Diane's side of the revolution, but the other side, they are not going to vote against Senate President Bolger. He has the votes, and he will have the votes until people vote some of them out of office.
So your advice to Charlie Flaherty is he better come home early from Ireland?
If I were in the House, if I were in the Massachusetts House right now and I were a Democrat, either a conservative Democrat or a liberal Democrat, I would be right now planning my revolution against Charlie Flaherty in January. I would be running for Speaker.
We'll be back in a minute to discuss that revolution. One of the deals we'll make with you is join us with your phone calls. The first caller to agree with Weld on this position, I think, will get a $16,000 check on Monday. So please stay tuned. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
Goodwill begets goodwill, and the manner in which one branch treats the other, I think, sometimes influences the way in which that branch's initiatives are treated reciprocally.
his music.
I have two feelings about it. One is perhaps they do deserve a pay raise. On the other hand, many of them have other jobs and they have really quite good annual income.
We're back. We're discussing this week's abomination on Beacon Hill, the pay raise, the capital gains thing, the deal, all those kinds of things. And we're doing it with Barbara Anderson from Citizens for Limited Taxation and State Senator Diane Wilkerson. We talked before the break about what might happen on the Bulger-Flaherty leadership front, and the feeling, at least in Barbara's mind, that Flaherty may be at risk, even though Bulger may not be in that case. Let's talk about the two substantive things for a second. My sense is that some legislators, maybe you, maybe one of your colleagues, stands up next week or the following week and says, listen, it doesn't matter whether you're for capital gains or against capital gains. If none of us knew what was going on and we want to be able to go home and say to our constituents, we're not part of that mob, then you got to stand up and repeal it. And let's, if you want to do it in the light of day in January. Is that a position you and others are going to push?
I think so. I think so. I would. I mean, that will be my position.
Is there talk about these kinds of things beginning already, or are people stunned? What's the deal?
I think people are stunned. I was actually surprised that as many legislators were willing to go on record as I read today in the press, and I'm happy, I'm encouraged by it. But I know that, unfortunately, these things blow over, and I'm hoping that they don't, because this is the essence of how this body works. And the public needs to understand that they are in control.
And I would like to see those same stunned legislators vote against their own pay raise at the same time because of the way the process was done. You know, the hypocrisy here on some people's parts, and not on Diane's, because she's one of the, Senator Wilkerson, because she's one of the few people who does work hard. Obviously, we've seen her working hard in the newspapers on the welfare reform, but the others, so many liberals thought that it was perfectly all right to use this process, this rotten process, to get themselves a pay raise, and now suddenly that process is used against them, and they're screaming bloody murder about it.
Well, let's find out.
They deserve what they get.
But that's a fair question, Diane. If you said a couple of minutes ago you didn't know about this repeal-proof thing, if you had known when you voted on the pay raise last Friday, whenever it was, that it had been made, quote, repeal-proof, would you still voted for it?
No, I would not have.
You would not. Now, let's stay on that.
And I said that before, that I wanted to have it stand alone and on its own, and if we can't defend it, we won't get a pay raise.
Well, let me give, since you didn't ask for my advice, let me give it anyway, and to any senators and reps watching, my sense is, again, I think a pay raise is murdered. I think this pay raise is an abomination. Why not also go in and say, listen, let's vote to repeal this thing and replace it with something that, one, isn't repeal-proof, two, doesn't go into effect until 1997, so voters out there have a chance not just to vote on repeal if you decide to do that, but have a chance to vote on you and your colleagues who voted for or against this. Why not at least attempt to do that? So at minimum, even if it's a losing effort, it challenges your colleagues to either put up or shut up, as they say.
I think you're going to see that. I mean, see, I don't think the question is necessarily whether someone's going to raise it and suggest that both the pay raise process and the capital gain process be revisited. I think the question is where other people are going to stand when it happens, and that's the piece that I'm hoping also gets discussed in the light of day and in a process where people can observe what the actions are.
Peter from Peabody, where do you stand? Are you going to be in line for that $16,000 check from Weld or no?
No, I was about to say I think you have a better chance of finding somebody who thinks Jocelyn Elders was wrongfully dismissed over the weekend.
I do.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to get on that topic, but
okay.
The people who would agree with this pay raise, I think, are going to be very few and far between. The thing that really angers me about this whole thing is the smugness, if you will, of the House Ways and Means Chair, Tom Finneran, who said in his quote that it was done just as straightforward as anything else around here.
Well,
that's the whole problem.
That was probably the only honest comment of the week, Peter, I think, from any of the legislative leaders. Did you vote for Weld, by the way?
No.
You didn't vote for him?
I wouldn't vote for him now. That's for damn sure. A man that doesn't keep his word. It wasn't on his radar screen, and suddenly it crash landed at the State House, and Billy Bulger's office caught on fire. Okay.
Literally and figuratively.
Yes.
Peter, I thank you for your call.
Thank you.
Barbara, the repeal effort. This may give people a headache, but there are really two ways to repeal things. One is by something called a referendum, and they arguably precluded that. But from what I read and hear from you, there's another way to skin that same cat. How do you do it?
People use referendum as sort of generic term, but actually a referendum is a repeal of an existing law, and you have to repeal exactly the same law that was passed. They did this on the seatbelt law. That was what was on the ballot. You can also have an initiative petition to repeal a law. That's like the rent control, which was a repeal of rent control, but it was an initiative petition to do it. That's why you needed a yes vote to repeal rent control and a no vote to repeal the seatbelt law.
Meaning a new law that would basically set legislative salaries either arguably back at where they were or wherever you choose to put them.
Or you could do some more imaginative things with it, I think. So, and on one hand, we kind of would like to do that, but it takes twice the number of signatures, and we have to wait till the fall to do it. The referendum we could have done right now, and it could possibly have gone on the ballot for the special election that's going to have to be held because the legislature also screwed up the other ballot questions because they voted on something in August that they didn't know what they were doing.
So you have your group and some of your colleagues have yet to make a formal decision as to whether or not you're going to get the signatures to do this.
Oh, no. Well, what we're doing, we're going to file next week a referendum to see what the Attorney General says, but he's already indicated that they're not going to let us do a referendum because it's an appropriation.
Were you surprised, and I have to say I was surprised by this, even when it was clear this deal was happening? My sense is, Weld made a bad enough decision to support this pay, or file the pay raise himself, and particularly when there's a commission that said $5,000 would have been fine. I thought that was a reasonable figure to pick. Were you surprised that he stayed with it even after it was clear, and he himself said it was clear that this thing probably was repeal-proof, and he didn't know about it in advance?
Because I was telling everybody that, yes, he was going to veto. I was sure he was going to veto once we were able to convince him that it was referendum-proof.
Just before you knew about the capital gains.
Just before I knew about the capital gains. Yeah.
Chris from Falmouth, you're with us. Welcome. You going to get that check? Where are you on this issue?
Yes, actually, I think we need to see something a little bit more than just a rollback of the pay raise. I think we need to see a new way of paying our representatives. What I'd like to see is their pay tied to the per capita average pay in the state, and the same thing for the governor and the lieutenant governor. And I think that this would be a big improvement because it makes it performance-based. In addition, what
do you mean, just so that I'm clear, you mean a cost of living adjustment kind of thing? Or
no, I think if the per capita wage in the state is $17,000 per person, I think the legislature should probably be looking at $34,000, twice that. The lieutenant governor, maybe 2.5 times that. The governor, 3 or 4 times that.
Fair enough. I understand the concept. What do you think of that, Diane?
Well, I lost him on how that then becomes performance-based.
Yeah, it would be. You wouldn't do it per capita. It would have to be your sort of general income, and you would then tie the growth in personal income in the state into what their increase would be, so there'd be an incentive for legislators to vote for things that were good for the economy and for their constituents, so that they too would get a pay raise based upon their performance in doing this.
Exactly.
Let me ask you 2 questions about your repeal effort. If this thing had been effective in '97, as I suggested a minute ago, where you and I and Diane and everybody would have, and this gentleman, Chris, would have been able to vote on the people who voted on it, would you still have been collecting signatures to repeal it?
You're talking about 1987?
No, 1997. If they had said, instead of this going into effect 30 days from now, whatever it is, this will not go into effect until people get to vote again on their elected representatives.
The argument they used, the argument that made some sense, was that you can attract different people, more people to run and have more competition in the process. That made sense if you had the pay raise apply to the next session, because then people would be recruiting
skip a session and go to the next one.
If the fact that they gave it to them right away means that's how we know it was just a bribe, because there's no reason based upon their own argument.
Right, but my question again is, if they had done it that way, which you and I seem to think would have been clearly a better way, if they had done it that way, would you still be talking repeal?
We didn't want to do a repeal, none of us. We begged some of them, please don't do it in a way that infuriates everybody, because nobody wants to do a repeal referendum.
Because you're so tired from the graduated income tax thing, is that what it is?
And so tired from the graduated income tax and term limits and everything else we were doing.
Pat from North Andover, welcome. Hi, Pat.
I have 2 comments.
Shoot.
The first one, I really don't think anyone should be allowed to make their own wages. All right? We don't in the public. Okay? And 2, as far as Weld and the legislature, bad enough what they did, but their attitude afterwards, as if we don't care what you think, it's tough. We're going to do what we want to do. And I hope that the time comes that Weld, if he runs for president, I hope Barbara Anderson reminds all of us, because we're very quick to forget what the people do.
Did you vote for Bill Weld, Pat?
Yes, I did. I liked him. And I'll tell you, I feel very betrayed by him. I knew what the legislator was like, but I was betrayed by him.
Would you vote for him again?
Never.
Wait a minute. Mark Roosevelt voted for this pay raise and the whole system. Now, there's something I want to point out here to Jim, my very good friend Jim.
Yes.
This is the system that you always want to give more money to. Liberals have always want more government, big government. Well, you just got what you asked for. You got your government. How do you like it?
Well, it's funny you say that. One of the things I want to discuss in the next segment with Alan Lupo and Carol Rivers was sort of what are the consequences other than for individuals involved in this, and you've really touched on the theme. For those of us who actually believe in government, and I think Diane and I probably believe in a little bit more activist version of government than you do, Barbara. I think we're the biggest losers because you're right. I just went on a campaign trail on the grad tax and tried to respond to what you said for 2 years. You can't trust those people. They're going to do something, and I kept saying if you're vigilant, if you're this, cynicism is so out of control as a result of this thing, and I can't say with a straight face, right, that any amount of vigilance works. Having said that, this caller a minute ago talked about Bill Weld and if he runs for president. There was an incredible article in the Globe today. It says he did capital gains. The Republicans love it. I think they're missing the point. I don't think the point is the pay raise. I don't think the point is capital gains. I think the point is that a guy who built his reputation in walking out on Ed Meese is now caught walking arm in arm with Charlie Flaherty and Bill Bolger, which is not the way that kind of ethical person acts. I think this is, as Michael Goldman, a consultant, said, the Teflon governor becomes the Velcro governor. What do you think about the impact on Weld?
His behavior has shocked me this week more than anyone's, I have to tell you, because I don't see how this is not a win for him. But he also is in the position a little different, I think, than Flaherty and Bolger, and that I think he has an opportunity to redeem himself. And I have no idea what it might be that he does to do that. It might be vetoes all three of the rent control, and I'm not suggesting that because, of course, I anticipate a major disaster in Boston.
Well, he's already vetoed the Cambridge case. Yeah.
Well, I understand that. I have not been able to figure out what he was thinking because I don't want to believe the obvious.
What about that? What do you really think he? I mean,
I couldn't figure out either. But your friend Senator Keating called me the other day, and he was trying to explain it to me. He said that it's a guy thing. And these guys, and it's even worse in the legislature.
Oh, then I can understand that, I'm
But
sure.
even worse in the legislature, they have this sort of us versus them mentality, and it's the guys, and it's sort of a macho thing. And at some point, I can almost picture this, the three of them sitting in a room, and they almost dare Bill Weld to do this and say, you know, it's going to be tough. Are you going to be able to stick to it? And Weld says, yeah, I can handle whatever the heat is. And then he's stuck with this. It could be as simple as Bill Weld can't back down because men don't back down.
I don't think it's part of the 71% also. I mean, this was trumpeted as it was the biggest victory since 1985. Isn't this the arrogance of power, to use an overused phrase, to its greatest extreme?
You know, I don't think so, only because I know that there was a lot of discussion, even amongst his cabinet, and his people were very concerned about the beating that he's taken this week. I didn't get the sense. I actually got a sense that there might be some waffling, and I was surprised that he didn't. But it's not. I don't even necessarily call it arrogance.
He and Bolger have gotten too close. I don't think it's Flaherty so much as it is Bill and Bolger are just. They're kindred
So we have an invitation. Most weeks, by the way, people watching the show, even though it's called Talk of New England, we get calls from Oklahoma, we get calls from Arizona, all these places that I don't even know if they're part of the United States. If anybody's watching in Ireland, particularly those three guys, call us after the break. We'll be back in 2 minutes. We'll stay with this topic for a few more. Stay tuned. We're back. One more round on the pay raise, the capital gains, the deal, the whole bowl of wax. Diane, 42 minutes on the pay raise. I wasn't exaggerating. House to Senate to governor's desk. 15 minutes on this capital gains thing. House to Senate to governor's desk. You've been working on a lot of things from welfare reform. Other people on the other side of the spectrum are working on things like death penalty. I happen to be against it, but whether they are or not, and the criticism is that nothing that's serious moves. Forget 42 minutes, 42 years in the State House. Is this going to give an impetus for some of these major issues to sort of be pushed forward? Is someone going to go to the Bolgers and the Flahertys, or does it matter next week and say, okay, you did this in 12 minutes, you did this one in 18, we want to vote on this issue?
Well, I think it's going to make it more difficult for people to continue to use the short time we have left as an excuse for not being able to do anything on welfare in particular is the one that I find just fascinating. There have probably been at least 7 or 8 members in either leadership or people who are very angry with Senator Pines and I who have said, we only have 4 weeks left. There's no way we're going to take up something as serious as welfare reform. And I'm sitting here having watched us, do a pay raise, draft a bill, have a hearing in 48 hours, and certainly then the capital gains. Of course, we didn't have to tell anybody what we were doing.
It's only $100 million bucks.
So
That's such a big deal.
It's doable. I think the whole discussion, which we haven't even had, is when we cut taxes, somebody has to pay for it. I mean, is somebody prepared to argue that we really only need $100 million less than what we're
She's sitting
spending
right here,
now?
but we're not going to have that discussion tonight because that's a 4-hour program.
I've always been on the...
I'm with you on this one, but
my position
not this
is,
one. Yeah.
It's not the leadership, it's the followership. And the followership is on trial this week. And part of the reason why they're so angry is because they got caught. They got exposed to the whole world having done what they do all the time, and that is allow the leadership to do whatever they want. And half the time they don't know what they're doing. And they got caught this time. And the question is, what are they going to do about it?
Will we let them get away?
Yeah.
Roger from Newton, welcome.
Yeah, I have a few comments. Number one, in terms of Senator Wilkerson, I didn't know, for example, that legislators did not know what they were voting on. And my question is, why don't you and others just vote no on everything, that every piece of legislation that you don't know what's in it,
That's
and
a
then
great
go
question.
to the press,
How about it?
and then go to the press and say, hey, look, I voted no because I didn't know what was in it. It's an outrage.
Roger, with those kind of questions, you should be sitting here and I should be watching. But it's a good. Thanks very much, Roger.
It's a practical question. It makes sense. And as a general rule, I usually do vote no when I don't know what it is.
You voted no on the education bill.
And in fact, that's right for that reason. And many times I've done it, and to the certainly anger of many of the leadership and my colleagues. But I think it's just basic courtesy. And the difficulty is, and I've heard Barbara talk about the legislature and the fact that, there were 200 people were bribed. That there isn't a way for people to be treated separately in this process. And I'm not arguing that we should. I work in a body with 40 members, and I accept that as a responsibility. But it's very hard to continue to convince the public that we're all not doing this, that we're all not like that, when it does appear that this is such a common occurrence.
Well, you never had a better issue to make that distinction on this one.
That's absolutely right.
Connie from Holyoke, welcome again this week. How are you?
Hi.
How you doing?
I just want to say I agree this is a terrible thing, but I would like to say one thing, and I think I've said it on this station before, that we only have ourselves to blame. Right here in Holyoke, we had some secret things done, went through, the council didn't know anything about it, just the mayor. Went through, and it was a big $1 million thing for a big company, a $1 million grant. And I told the people at this commission that I belong to, that's welfare, as far as I'm concerned. Oh, no, it's a grant. What's the difference? We
so what do we do?
It.
What do we do? Secret dealings in Holyoke.
I think you've got to make the taxpayer remember from November to November and stop this foolishness and stop going to a bar and yelling and going over coffee and yelling and do something about it.
Yeah, she's so right, but you have to understand, Jim and Senator, too. This is why we don't want to give them any more money. This is what government does, because just by definition, government takes our money by force. We don't choose to give it, takes as much as they can possibly grab, and does what they want with it without any reason to be accountable. That's why until you get the government to work, I personally am not willing to give them any more money. I want to give them a lot less. Let them prove. Let the government prove itself first before it gets more of my money. Why am I wrong about this, Jim?
I'm only smiling at Barbara because we almost made it through a whole show without us having this discussion, but shoot, Diane.
I'll tell you why, and I think that Connie may have just said it, because that's the first step. You have to follow. You have to be there. There's no reason. There hasn't been much reason for people to change behavior because they keep getting reelected and they send them back, knowing full well what they do and how they do it. And so part of the message you take from that is that I'm doing what the people want. And this kind of once every 2-year participation where we have a public who treats this process like a spectator sport when it's supposed to be participatory. And granted, there are many things done that discourage it.
But sometimes the choices aren't easy. I mean, for instance, if I had to vote for one person inside the process who plays the game like this, or you with whom I disagree on everything, it would be a tough decision. Yeah. I'd rather vote for you. I like you better, and I share your concern about the process. But I'm not going to vote for a liberal who wants to raise my taxes. So what then is it to vote in my
Luckily, I'm not in the legislature, so you don't have to worry about it.
Except the biggest secret, one of the biggest secrets in the State House is if you look at what the people who are supposed to be in the in crowd are able to produce, it won't be any different list than mine. And that's why I don't understand why they're doing it.
Can I ask you guys, we just have a minute and a half from this segment. And politics and anger, as Connie mentioned a couple of minutes ago, one of the ways I see this pay raise repeal thing, if it's on the ballot, one, it keeps this anger alive. And I think that's actually a positive benefit. But also there's something that hasn't been talked about. We're the only state in America that missed the tidal wave of anti-incumbency in 1994. My sense is this is the thing that, for better or worse, I don't know if this is good or bad, causes the tidal wave not to miss this next. I don't even care if you're John Kerry, who had nothing to do with this. You're an incumbent. Incumbents do those kinds of things. Diane Wilkerson, even if you stand up next week and the following week and do all the things you talked about, doesn't that occur to you that that's the potential spillover of the anger continuing for 2 years if this thing's on the ballot?
Does it worry me?
Am I right to say that that may happen, that may cause the anti-incumbent feeling that missed us in 94 to happen in 96?
It's a delayed reaction. They're going to get it in 96.
You're right, but I wouldn't call it worry. See, I would be happy if people got angry enough to participate in a process they weren't necessarily going to otherwise participate in.
So the question is, Jim, will you join us in our referendum repeal?
Unfortunately, we're out of time on this segment. If we had had 30 more seconds, I could have answered the question. Early next week. You just watched 40 minutes where State Senator Diane Wilkerson, Barbara Anderson, and I agreed on virtually everything. It will never happen again. Stay tuned. We'll be back with Carol Rivers and Alan Lupo in a couple of minutes talking about leadership, elders, the whole bull of wax. Don't go away.